Hello, dear open designers. So this is the follow-up video on the last session of sketching, where we are adding some information and knowledge about semiotics that didn't fit into the class. So we learned in class something about the general approach of semiotics, like the theory or science of signs. Signifiers signified the composition of the sign, and how to deal with these two elements that are normally combined in a sign. But a sign has more levels than that. If you look at a sign like this, then you might think, okay, what am I seeing? I'm seeing a heart, probably, the symbol of a heart, and this symbol is telling me some things. And the things that I associate with this sign, the meaning of it, this meaning can be separated in two areas. One area is the denotation, one area is the connotation, and both are a crucial part of every sign. Speaking about the heart, we have a denotation. That means, what does it mean by the sense of the sign? It's a muscle, it's a pump, it's pumping blood, it's an organ, it's part of the body. But it also has the connotation of love, feeling, romance, partnership that might be even more important than the denotation in certain communicative aspects. So always think of denotation and connotation when you are dealing with signs, and ask yourselves which connotations are activated by the context of usage. Which do you actually want to communicate, and which do you want to avoid? But they could be associated with this specific sign. There are also connotations sometimes that really depend on the context, so they can really go into different directions. So be aware of that. All signs kind of work like that. Then we should ask ourselves, how do we actually catch the meaning? How do we catch the concept or the signified, which is part of the language, which is kind of in our heads? And we do that by definition. Definition is kind of drawing a border. It's drawing a border around the concept so we can grasp it, we can separate it from similar concepts, and we can communicate it in a way that we say, okay, I am defining something for you so you can understand it afterwards. If you don't know a sign, if you don't know a word, the definition will help you to connect it with signs that you already know, and therefore construct the meaning in your head. A definition is coming from Latin definitio, for delimitation, differentiation, and borderline. So it's really about drawing this border against other parts of the meaning. And it's normally a statement that explains the meaning of a signifier or denomination. So something that you can get by your senses. A sound, that's a word, or a written word, or a symbol, or all the other signs that we talked about. The size of a definition can be very different, so they can be differently detailed. Depending on who the definition is for, you're selecting how to construct it. You can create a definition that is very short, or very long. So in the extremes, you could even say a definition can be one word, like a synonym. If that synonym is 100% synonym, that is a perfect definition, as long as the person you're giving that definition to knows the synonym. Another case of a definition can be much longer. You have regular definitions in dictionaries, but you have also more extended explanations in the lexicon, like, for example, Wikipedia, where you can sometimes have long articles about a certain context and a certain concept, And these longer articles can also be considered a definition. Or you go even further, for example, with certain books from philosophy. We can say there is a whole book that is basically a definition for a specific concept. And so you see, a definition is not a regular sentence. It can be everything that helps us grasp what that denomination actually means. On the level of denotation and connotation, you kind of should try, if you're defining something, to first define the denotation, the explicit meaning, and then go to the connotation and explore which connotational level are activated in which contexts and to whom. Of course, there are multiple possible definitions for the same denomination, and if you try to define a certain concept with your fellow students, you will realize that you come up with many different definitions, and it's pretty hard to say what belongs into the definition and what not. So the variety of possible definitions is also something that that affects the concept itself. So what is relevant? If you define something, you're again interpreting, translating, recreating a concept in the minds of the people. And therefore you need to ask yourself, how should that look? What do I select? What is important? What is not important? In cases of Wikipedia, you might know that there's a huge discussion about many articles. How should we define it? What is important? What do we have to include? What can we exclude? And this discussion kind of reflects the variety of possible definitions. And also, it's important to understand that these definitions kind of have a world-building function. They are kind of creating these concepts in the minds of the readers, and these concepts are applied to the world. So the definitions are kind of arranging how they use it, how they understand it, and how the world and their description is composed through these concepts. So there's a huge responsibility also about defining definitions and writing definitions and defining certain concepts that you want to talk about. And by the way, of course, the definition, in which way ever you choose to communicate, it's the only way to communicate the concept, because you cannot connect your brains directly. And this weird thing of a concept we have in our head, it's not directly accessible. We need to translate it again into other signs. There is another important thing about signs that is the arbitrariness. So normally we do not have any external reason for a specific signifier to be assigned to a specific context. We can see that easily, that every language is assigning different signifiers to the same or similar signified, and there is no relation why this specific signifier is selected. Even onomatopoeia are assigned arbitrarily. For example, the sound of a cock is kikeriki in German, it's cock-a-doodle-doo in English, and cocorico in French. So you can see even the sounds that are kind of directly seeming directly to move into a word or a representation. Same is, by the way, with emoticons and icons. This seeming direct representation is still something constructed, something that needs to be learned. So the arbitrariness is there again active, even for these cases. If you look at an example like that, you might think, okay, this is kind of a sign, and if you try to interpret it, you will find, okay, we still have some things that are familiar. Probably it's a person there that is in distress somehow, something bad is happening. There is a triangle again, the color red. Something is trying to warn us with a exclamation mark. Apparently something is coming from the left, that indicates the arrow, and is probably harming the person, crushing it probably. But what that is, how it is crushed, what exactly to be aware of, I don't know it. I don't know what this sign means. And you can see that even if you're decomposing these signs, you need to learn what to actually be aware of. If you're in a situation like that, you know, okay, probably I should be aware of something coming, but is it from the left? Is it always from the left? Is it actually a box coming, or is something very else? I don't know. So again, the signs, the meanings of the signs have to be learned. Then there's the aspect of conventionality. So this combination of signified and signifier only exists because there is a convention about it. People agreed about it. Actually, they probably did not have an agreement about it. They did not sit together and decide, okay, we call this like this and this like that. Although this is also happening, especially in specialized contexts, when people are actually naming things or processes or concepts. But this convention kind of establishes itself through the history of language. So language is changing, it's changing all the time, but it's changing slow enough for us to learn these conventions and realize the changes. To break it down, you can say at least two persons have to agree on the combination to make it a sign. If it's only one person, it's possibly also an extreme case. You can say, okay, I'm defining certain words for myself, for my future self, and only myself can understand them. That's an extreme case, but it's also still a conventionality. You put it out there, you make a decision what it means, and this combination of signifier and signified is kind of stable. The stability, that is the important part. Otherwise, we could not communicate, not with ourselves, not with others. We could not even think, probably, because we are thinking in language. We are thinking in the concepts that are designed by the language we think in. We could even say without that, we would dream differently. Of course, as I just said, every sign has a history, and also languages have history. And I showed you that book the other day. I still have it here. So this book, for example, this is an etymology dictionary. So you can really look up the meaning of the words, how it changed over time, how also the words themselves changed. All these changes on the level of the signified and on the level of the signifier, both levels are changing. They can be there can be research about, you can look it up. So words are moving through languages and locations. Back in the time, traveling routes were also traveling routes for languages. So if there's a place where many travelers are getting through, they will probably leave a bit of their languages there, and they will merge into the language of the space. The phonology is changing over time, and the meaning is changing over time, as I said. And that is happening all the time. That's happening every second, you could say, but not that fast, because we are a huge community of speakers of one language. So we are actually managing to have a stable meaning at a time. That is this perspective. The change over time is the diachronical point of view. So through time, diachronical. At a certain moment, we speak of the synchronical point of view. So this is the language system at a given time. Again, Saussure, he is describing all this, how to look at languages and structures of sign systems in general. And he says, linguistics will have to recognize laws operating universally in language and in a strictly rational manner, separating general phenomena from those restricted to one branch of languages or another. So there is a difference between some universal laws of how sign systems operate, how they change, what is the same for all sign systems, and what is specific, for example, to a language like German or Spanish. If we separate these levels, we are much better able to understand what we are dealing with and how to describe it and how to research it. Another very important thing that directly relates to this perspective is the one of langue and parole. The langue, that is kind of the general system of the language, like the grammar and the lexicon. So the words that are known and understood in that language, how to create a grammatical construction, a sentence in a specific language. That is the langue, the language system, you could say. And then there is the parole. The parole is the spoken language of each and every speech act. So everything I'm doing right now, speaking, that is parole. But I'm using the langue, in this case of English, to construct whatever I say. And you can see that actually everything in existence, like language out there, it's all parole. But behind it, there is this langue, this general language system in all our heads, similar enough for us to construct meaningful sentences, but probably still different in each and every representation in our minds. Below on the slide, you can see that the langue is composed out of the lexicon and the grammar, and it's pretty easy to distinguish them. The grammar is rule-based, so you have some rules, grammatical constructions, and stuff like that. And the lexicon, that is not rule-based, things you have to learn, like vocabulary or exceptions also from rules. That's also part of the lexicon. So that is the langue, and then it creates the parole, each and every concrete speech act out there. And of course, when we are dealing with this composition of signs having always two parts and being only signs when they have these two parts, we have also some edge cases like synonymy. We have the same signified but different signifier. So it is several words for the same concept, you could say. But be careful with that, because synonymy very often is not 100% synonymy. Or it's only in certain cases 100% synonymy, and in others it could mean something else. Because there's a thing called language economy. It's like a rule that languages are kind of sorting out completely redundant parts of the lexicon to kind of simplify it. It's not that somebody is actively doing that, but in the development of language it just happens. So be aware, if you look at synonyms, if they are really synonyms in your context. Same signified, different signifier. And then there's the opposite, the homonymy. So we have the same signifier but different signified, like you are having a Jaguar here, like the car, it's the operating system, or the animal, Jaguar, the German word. We are actually addressing very different concepts with the same signifier. And of course, you have to be aware when you find homonymy, what are you actually talking about? Is the context clarifying what I'm meaning, or might there be a space for misunderstandings? And then there's the most interesting part, the polysemy, where we have the same signifier again, but different, similar signified. For example, university. In the pictures below, you see a picture of Humboldt University, the building. So in that case, I refer to the building when I call something university. And then we have the logo of the Humboldt University, or the institution of the university itself, as something that works in a legal way in the country or a specific context. So you can see all of that is called university, but we are meaning different concepts that are related and describing certain aspects of the same thing. One last thing I want to give you, and that is the question of the value, or valeur, as Ferdinand de Saussure calls it. So the question is, what is actually the value of a word? You can say you have, for example, two words, cold and hot, and they have to describe the full spectrum of temperature, right? If you only have these two words, cold and hot, and you don't have another word to describe temperature, cold and hot have to be used for all the temperatures. It's either cold or hot. You have to decide. It's covering a whole range of possible meanings. So the value of cold and hot in this context is pretty high. It's covering a lot of references. If you add another word like warm, the whole system changes. And that is kind of interesting. If you just introduce a new sign in a sign system, it is not just an addition. It's a change of the whole system. Because suddenly, in this example, cold and hot mean less. So before that, cold and hot kind of covered each 50% of the temperature scale, so to say. And in this case, we have a third word, warm, and cold and hot that have existed before have less meaning, like 33%, a third, because warm is covering something in the middle. Not exactly saying where is the border of that meaning. That is not the important point here. Just understand that a sign, the introduction of a sign, is not just an addition, but changing the whole system. And that is meant by this structural perspective. You cannot add something to an existing structure without changing the whole structure in itself. So this is basically what I wanted to give you as a preparation also for the next lessons. I hope it was useful. And yeah, see you tomorrow. Bye bye.